There is an island where people disappear. Not one person, not two. Over the past 12 years, at least 9 individuals have vanished without a trace. Different ages, different backgrounds, different reasons for being there, but the same outcome: gone. And when families ask questions, they're met with silence. When journalists investigate, doors close. When authorities are pressed for answers, statements become vague, timelines shift, and case files seem to vanish just as completely as the people themselves. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is documented reality. And no one in power will explain why it keeps happening. The island sits in the North Atlantic, roughly 30 miles off the coast of Maine. For legal reasons, we'll refer to it as Graymore Island, though locals know it by another name. It's small, just over 8 square miles, rocky, windswept and sparsely populated. Around 400 permanent residents live there year-round, mostly fishermen, ferry operators, and families who've been there for generations. In summer, that number swells. Tourists arrive to hike the coastal trails, photograph the lighthouses, and stay in the handful of bed and breakfasts that dot the shoreline. Seasonal workers come for the cannery and the docks. It's quiet, isolated. The kind of place people go to escape the noise of the mainland. On the surface, it's peaceful, quaint even. Crime rates are low. Everyone knows everyone. The ferry runs twice a day, weather permitting. There's one school, one church, one general store. Life moves slowly. But beneath that surface, there's something else. A tension, a silence that feels deliberate. And if you stay long enough, you start to notice the gaps in conversation, the names that aren't mentioned, the questions that don't get asked. Because on Graymore Island, people have learned not to talk about the disappeared. The first disappearance happened in late August, 12 years ago. Her name was Mallory Haynes, a 26-year-old marine biologist from Boston. She'd come to Graymore as part of a summer research program studying seal populations along the northern coast. She was passionate, meticulous, and well-liked by the small team she worked with. Colleagues described her as cautious, someone who double-checked her equipment, always told someone where she was going, and never took unnecessary risks. On August 23rd, she left the research station around 6 in the morning to check monitoring equipment along the eastern cliffs. It was a routine trip. She'd made it dozens of times before. She carried a GPS tracker, a radio, and enough supplies for a full day in the field. She never returned. When she didn't check in by noon, her supervisor radioed her. No response. By 3 p.m., they'd contacted the island's small constable office. A search began within the hour. They found her backpack near the cliff edge, contents intact. Her GPS tracker was inside. Last ping recorded at 7:42 a.m. Her radio was there too, turned off. No signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away, no blood, no clothing, just her bag, sitting neatly on a flat rock, as if she'd set it down and walked away. The official explanation came 3 days later: accidental fall. The cliffs were dangerous, the rocks slick with morning dew. She must have slipped. The currents were strong, bodies didn't always surface. Her family didn't believe it. Mallory was experienced. She knew those cliffs. And if she'd fallen, why was her bag undisturbed? Why was the GPS turned off inside it when protocol required keeping it on her person? But the case was closed. The search was called off. And within a week, the island moved on. What no one realized at the time was that this was only the beginning. 15 months later, a man named David Ruiz disappeared. He was 34, a contractor from New Jersey, hired to do renovation work on one of the island's older homes. He'd been staying in a rental cottage near the harbor. Co-workers said he was reliable, showed up on time, kept to himself. He had a wife and 2 young kids back home. He called them every night. On the evening of November 18th, David finished his shift around 5 p.m. He told his co-workers he was heading back to the cottage to clean up, then planned to grab dinner at the island's only diner. Security footage from the general store shows him buying a sandwich and a pack of cigarettes at 5:47 p.m. He was seen walking toward the harbor shortly after. He never made it to the diner. He never returned to the cottage. His phone went straight to voicemail. His wallet, keys, and work tools were later found in his room, untouched. A search was conducted. The ferry operator confirmed David hadn't left the island. His car was still parked where he'd left it. Dive teams checked the harbor. Volunteers combed the woods. Nothing. The official statement, possible voluntary disappearance due to personal stress. Authorities suggested he may have left the island by unofficial means, perhaps a private boat, and chose not to contact his family. His wife rejected that theory immediately. David had no reason to run, no debts, no affairs, no history of mental health crises. He was 3 weeks away from finishing the job and going home. But once again, the case went cold. The investigation stalled, and the island continued as if nothing had happened. But locals were starting to talk, quietly, carefully. 2 disappearances in 2 years, both involving outsiders, both with no bodies. Both closed quickly by authorities with explanations that didn't quite fit, and then it happened again. Her name was Sienna Delgado. She was 19, a college student from Portland, spending her summer working at one of the bed and breakfasts. She was studying hospitality management, saving money for her sophomore year. Her boss described her as bright, punctual, and friendly with guests. On July 9th, Sienna finished her shift at the inn around 2 in the afternoon. She told a co-worker she was going for a walk along the Southern Trail, a popular path that looped through the woods and back to the main road. She'd walked it several times before. It was broad daylight, the weather was clear. She was expected back by dinner. She didn't show. Her boss called her phone, no answer. By nightfall, a search was organized. They found her phone on the trail, screen cracked, lying in the dirt about half a mile from the inn. Her sneaker was found 20 feet away, laces still tied. No other belongings, no signs of an animal attack, no evidence of foul play. The official explanation this time, likely abduction by a transient individual who left the island before authorities could respond. But that theory raised more questions than it answered. How does someone abduct a young woman in broad daylight on a known trail and leave the island undetected? The ferry logs were checked. No strangers had come or gone that day. Private boats were accounted for. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. Sienna's family pushed for a deeper investigation. They hired a private investigator. They contacted state police. They demanded answers. They were told the case was being handled, that resources were limited, that the island had done everything it could. And then, quietly, the case was transferred to a cold case unit on the mainland. No charges, no suspects, no updates. 3 disappearances, 3 different people, 3 different explanations, but the same result: silence. By now, a pattern was undeniable. All 3 victims were outsiders. None of them born on the island. All 3 vanished during daylight or early evening hours. All 3 left behind personal items, but no clear evidence of what happened. And in all 3 cases, official investigations concluded quickly, often with explanations that left families and outside investigators unsatisfied. But the pattern went deeper than that. In each case, there were reports of witnesses who claimed to have seen something, but those accounts were never included in official reports. A fisherman claimed he saw a man matching David Ruiz's description being escorted into a building near the docks the night he disappeared. A hiker said she saw Sienna talking to 2 men in dark clothing near the trailhead an hour before she vanished. Neither of these witnesses were interviewed by authorities. When journalists began asking questions, they found it nearly impossible to get residents to speak on record. Off the record, some locals hinted at rumors, unexplained comings and goings at night, boats without lights, areas of the island where people were warned not to go. One former resident who'd moved to the mainland years earlier said in an anonymous interview, Everyone knows you don't ask questions on Greymoor, you don't talk about the missing, you don't poke around, because if you do, you might be next. But what were they afraid of? The institutional response, or lack of it, became its own source of suspicion. The island's constable office consisted of 2 officers, both locals who'd lived on Greymoor their entire lives. When pressed by mainland authorities, they maintained that each case had been investigated thoroughly, but case files obtained through Freedom of Information requests were heavily redacted. Key reports were missing. Witness statements that locals claimed were given were never documented. State police were called in after Sienna's disappearance, but their involvement was brief. They conducted interviews, reviewed evidence, and left. Their findings were never made public. When Sienna's family demanded to see the full report, they were told it was part of an ongoing investigation and could not be released. That investigation has been ongoing for 9 years. Attempts to involve federal authorities went nowhere. The FBI reviewed the cases and declined to open an investigation, citing insufficient evidence of a federal crime. The Coast Guard participated in maritime searches but found nothing. Meanwhile, the local government issued statements urging calm. The island's council released a joint letter assuring residents and visitors that Greymoor was safe, that these were isolated incidents, and that there was no reason to believe anyone was in danger. But the disappearances didn't stop. Over the following years, 6 more people vanished. A 52-year-old teacher who'd moved to the island to retire, a ferry worker in his 30s, a photographer visiting from Canada, a teenage boy whose family had lived on Greymoor for generations, one of the few locals to disappear, a waitress, a fisherman, different people, different circumstances, same outcome. Some cases received media attention, most didn't. Families pleaded for help. Some hired private investigators who found themselves blocked at every turn, witnesses who refused to talk, records that were incomplete, officials who were polite but uncooperative. One investigator who worked 3 separate cases on Greymoor said, "It's like the island has an immune system. The more you dig, the harder it pushes back. People stop returning calls, doors close, evidence disappears. It's not that they don't want to solve these cases, it's that they don't want them solved." Odin, and the most disturbing part. In nearly every case, the timeline doesn't add up. Witnesses place victims in locations that contradict official reports. Time-stamped photos show people alive hours after they were supposedly last seen. Cell tower records suggest phones were active long after searches were called off, but when these discrepancies are brought to authorities, they're dismissed as clerical errors or misunderstandings. It's as if the island itself is rewriting the story as it happens. So what's really going on? There are theories, many theories, none confirmed, all unsettling. Theory 1, a serial offender. Some believe a single individual or a small group is responsible, someone who knows the island intimately, someone protected by the community, either out of fear or complicity. The victims are chosen carefully, outsiders, people without deep local ties, individuals who won't be missed immediately. But if this is true, why has no evidence ever surfaced? Why have no remains been found? Theory 2, organized activity. Others suggest something more coordinated. Human trafficking networks operate in remote coastal areas. Greymoor's isolation, limited law enforcement, and proximity to shipping routes make it a potential transit point. Victims could be taken off the island by boat, moved before anyone realizes they're gone. But trafficking networks leave traces, witnesses, records, patterns. Greymoor has none of that. Theory 3, institutional cover-up. The darkest theory is that authorities know exactly what's happening and are choosing not to act. Why? Perhaps to protect the island's reputation and tourism economy. Perhaps because someone with power is involved. Perhaps because exposing the truth would reveal negligence or corruption so deep that it's easier to let people vanish than to face accountability. This theory explains the missing case files, the redacted reports, the witnesses who are never interviewed, but it requires a level of coordinated silence that seems almost impossible to maintain. Theory 4. Something no one wants to name. And then there are the whispers. The rumors that don't fit neatly into any criminal framework. Locals who speak, off the record, about parts of the island where you don't go alone. About sounds at night that don't match any known animal. About old families who've lived on Greymore for generations and have a way of making problems disappear. These accounts are vague, often second-hand, impossible to verify, but they persist, and they all share one common thread. The island protects its secrets. Today, at least 9 people remain missing from Greymore Island. Officially, their cases are open. In practice, they are frozen. Families continue to search. Online communities dedicated to unsolved disappearances have made Greymore a focal point, analyzing maps, comparing timelines, and sharing theories. Some have traveled to the island themselves, only to find a place that seems determined to forget. Tourists still visit. The ferry still runs. Life continues, but those who know the history walk the trails a little faster. They avoid certain parts of the island. They don't go out after dark. And when someone new goes missing, because statistically it will happen again, the response will be the same. A brief search, a vague statement, a quiet closing of the case. Because on Greymore Island, asking questions is more dangerous than the silence itself. What happened to Mallory Haynes, David Ruiz, Sienna Delgado, and the 6 others who vanished? Were they victims of a single predator, taken by an organized network, silenced by those in power? Or did they stumble into something the island has been hiding for longer than anyone wants to admit? The truth is, we may never know, because the people who could provide answers have chosen not to, and the system that should demand justice has chosen to look away. These were real people. They had families, they had futures, and they deserved better than to be erased. If you know anything about these disappearances, if you've been to Greymore and seen something that didn't sit right, share it. Speak up. Because silence is what allows this to continue. And if this story affected you, consider subscribing. We cover cases like this, cases that fall through the cracks, cases that authorities want forgotten, because the disappeared deserve to be remembered. And the truth, no matter how buried, deserves to be found.